Hi, welcome to Digital Wellbeing for Caregivers and Educators. This is a virtual workshop that I'm really pleased to be presenting on behalf of Kagumi Group as well as Ed Diversity as part of their Digital Wellbeing Workshop package. So let's dive in. So, a little bit about Ed Diversity, who is the organizer of this wonderful workshop. So, their vision as an NGO registered in Hong Kong beginning in 2014, that was parent initiated, is that every child is different and should be recognized for that uniqueness. Education needs to be personalized and it needs to be agency for the child. So, since their founding, Adversity has been focused on inspiring parents and educators throughout Hong Kong to make the education choices that are the most suitable for their children. This is inside as well as out of school. Today, we are going to be covering quite a lot of ground, but don't worry, we will keep it as concise as possible. And we're going to travel through the topic of digital well-being from a caregiver perspective. There will be a lot of content that is transferable to a certain degree into educational circumstances, but really the centricity here is going to be about caregivers. So this can be parents, this can be people who are the primary caregivers or secondary caregivers of children of any age, and it could be extended family members as well. So one of the things we want to start out with mentioning is that digital well-being is an evolving topic. It's still pretty new, and part of how it's new is that people don't have language and vocabulary about what digital well-being is. So part of this workshop will be empowering you to have the confidence to say, this is the language that digital well-being has in my life for me, right? And the second thing I want to highlight here is that what we have found as a company working in this digital well-being space in Hong Kong for several years now is that digital well-being tends to be a topic that is everyone's problem, but nobody's fault. Right? So it's everyone's problem when a child or an individual or an employee has a digital well-being problem. Often it's manifested in a mental health concern, or maybe there's a literal risk, physical risk, or there's just a behavioral problem. Whatever it is, all of a sudden it becomes everyone's problem because an individual or a set of individuals is now acting out in some way that hurts themselves or hurts others, right? But even when that happens, we find that it's extremely difficult to say whose fault is that problem, right? And so today, by being here and listening to the workshop, you are one person who is standing up and saying, this is something that I am taking part responsibility for. I may not be taking full responsibility for it because it takes a village to raise our children, but I don't want to let these digital well-being problems metastasize and snowball in my family and my community and my school. But first, I want to introduce myself very briefly, as well as the company I'm representing. My name is Mila Davenport, and I'm the founder and chief education officer of a company called Kagumi Group, which is based here in Hong Kong. My personal background has been in the social impact and philanthropy field. So I previously ran and launched disability inclusion programs, as well as gender inclusivity programs and educational programs serving underprivileged children in countries like Singapore, Hong Kong, Thailand, and Malaysia. I also have an educational background teaching children under the age of 15 philosophy and teaching them ethical reasoning skills through a program called Philosophy for Children. And finally, I have a master's degree in character education, which is values-based education, teaching children and families things like integrity, honesty, how to talk about these topics, and how to bring these in meaningful ways into their everyday life instead of them just being sort of nice words to put on the shelf. As I started Kagumi Group, I also received a certification in AI ethics from IEEE, and now Kagumi Group is a social enterprise focused on delivering digital well-being and really character-driven AI ethics curriculum and consultancy services to children, schools, and parents across Asia. We're really privileged to have worked with a number of private sector, education sector, and also nonprofit sector clients and partners. And we also partner with academic advisors from leading universities to make sure that the curriculum that we create in digital well-being and AI ethics really is incorporating not only evidence-based practices about child development and machine learning, but it also is cutting edge and innovative about everything we know about how AI and emerging technology is being developed. So the first thing I want to cover is how to think about parenting in a digital age. And I like to think about digital parenting like driving a car with your kids in the back. So you're the driver, the car is your family, driving is parenting, and you're steering your family down the path of living in a digital age. Like in any car, you have car seats, seat belts, and airbags. And it's a given that any car you choose should have those things, right? So, in this metaphor of parenting in a digital age being a car, the airbags and the seat belts and the car seats are what we would consider cyber safety. So, these are the technical skill sets that we teach our kids almost in a common sense way that we don't even think about. Like, we tell them things like, don't click on weird links that people send to you, don't talk to strangers online, right? Don't send money to someone online, and just things that we already sort of know in our gut as our generation of parents. And that's what we would consider technical cyber safety. It's extremely important, just like an airbag is extremely important. But the question today is the seatbelt and the airbag enough to keep your kids safe and healthy in a car? And are they enough to get your kid to where they need to go in life? And the answer is no, right? Seatbelts and airbags are extremely important, but they're relatively small parts of the action of driving and getting your family safely and healthily to the place they need to go. So it doesn't matter how fancy your car is or how many airbags you buy if you don't focus on developing your competency as a parent driving the car. Yeah. So the first part of the workshop you will see is focused on the cyber safety side. It's focused on seatbelts and airbags. And we're starting that because cyber safety is usually the most urgent problems that usually we need to address first, right? Because if your kid really gets into trouble by clicking on a link or talking to a stranger or sending money or sending photos, then you obviously need to address that immediately. That's very time sensitive and can be extremely important to manage that risk. But that's not all that digital well-being is, right? So after that first part of the workshop, we're going to move to the second one. And the second one is going to be how to develop your competency to become a better driver as a digital parent or a parent in a digital age. And hopefully what we'll be able to focus and leave you with after this second half is that you will improve your sense of how to continue learning how to learn about a topic like this, even after you finish this video and this workshop. So you have your handbook and you have maybe a cup of coffee. I would encourage you to get some water, some caffeine. And finally, you have some reflective questions here. So I want you to turn to page 3 in your handbook and journal for a few minutes about these topics. What this will help to do is to frame your own learning for your brain as well as your heart. And this is part of the metacognitive preliminary questions that we use for all of our children's trainings and with digital well-being. So this will help to warm up your brain, and it actually makes your brain ready to absorb the questions that are coming later. So do take a few minutes to do this. So after you've done that, welcome to the first chapter of the workshop, which is Understanding Digital Natives. And we're going to draw a little bit from some of the area of theory that is coming out of sociology and child development around this idea of a phone-based childhood. This is a terminology that has been largely popularized in recent years through the work of the sociologist at NYU named Jonathan Haidt. And we're just going to cover it briefly. Again, it's a working theory. So back in the 1980s, the theory goes that even though we had internet access beginning around, kids who were born in the 80s sort of had internet access at home, it was very slow. So it had high latency is another way of saying it was extremely slow. So you'd have to dial up, you'd have to like wait for the dial tone. And, like it wasn't so easy to go onto so many platforms at one time. You couldn't have 50 tabs open. Also, there was no social media. So that's the beginning of what they would consider the first generation of digital natives who had technology at their fingertips at home, but it was still very slow. And then when you get into the 90s, what we see is that it's the beginning of MySpace, social media. Smartphones are not really, really common until after 2000, the early 2000s for most economic levels across the world, but it's starting, right? So I personally received my first smartphone when I was about 14 years old, and I received my first phone, which was in 2015, and I received my first flip phone, non-smartphone, but my first individual phone to sort of become an independent adult about 3 years before that, right? In 2003 or 2002. So again, we're still digital natives. We started using technology at a formative adolescent period where we were exploring our identities, but it wasn't really embedded in the way that we see now. And then as we move into kids who went through adolescence or were born between the mid 2000s to pre-pandemic, we see that social media becomes really normalized. So number one, this is the period where YouTube becomes really big. Instagram is introduced. Facebook is obviously already very big. And we see that smartphones are being introduced and smart devices like smartwatches are being introduced at increasingly early ages, regardless of the economic level. And finally, we see then 2018 hits. We have our global crisis. And not only do we have a crisis that brings many, many children globally online into e-learning spaces and keeps them at home for safety reasons related to pandemics, but we also see that 2018 is the first year that all of a sudden kids of any age can access generative AI without really very many restrictions. So we do see that childhood has become much more technology heavy, shall we say, yeah? And even though we may think that this is all a bad thing, I do want to focus on the fact that digital natives is not something that is new to us. Digital natives, like I mentioned before, was a term that was coined to apply to the generation of children who were born in the 80s, who had this experience of being the first people to grow up through formative adolescent periods, social periods where they're developing their identity, they're forming bonds, they're understanding what healthy communication style looks like. All of these formative sort of child development experiences or human development experiences were impacted by home-based technology. Yeah. So digital natives are not something that just like appeared in the early 2000s. But what we do want to focus on is that digital natives who are Generation Z or Generation Alpha or Gen A do have a unique experience that it's important for caregivers to understand, which is that they are unusually impacted by technology during those formative childhood stages. That's not all bad. They have traits that are fantastic because they're able to maintain a very creative stream using a lot of different tools. We also see that they're very inclusive and they want to do good things for the world. Actually, there's a lot of kindness, there's a lot of empathy, right? But at the same time, there's a lot of challenges with the technology that they've been brought up with. So we don't want to demonize the kids who have grown up with technology, but at the same time, we as parents, as caregivers, we do want to acknowledge that all of those opportunities that technology has brought them do come accompanied with risks that need to be managed. Yeah. So the thing that the phone-based childhood theory by Jonathan Haidt has brought up into the social psyche is that he noticed, like others of his colleagues, that there is a correlation, they believe, between the time that smartphones were gaining prominence and social media was becoming more popular, between that and the increase of depression and anxiety amongst children who are below the age of 12 or 10, and adolescents who are generally above the age of 10 and 12, depending on your definition. So specifically, depression and anxiety rate increased between the period of 2010 and 2019. And we see this sort of amongst US populations, and we also see this amongst non-US populations. So this is sort of the way the theory goes. But as a digital well-being social enterprise, again, we don't spend time only trying to look at all of the risks. We also talk to the kids directly. We talk to digital natives as much as we can. And when we talk to them, in this case, we talk to some Gen Z natives who were between 19 and 21 years old. We see that they also want to work on their own digital well-being. They are people who are complex. They have a sense of when they've crossed a boundary for themselves with technology. And they also have a sense of the individual experience of digital well-being, as well as a sense that they want to increase the community digital well-being in their school or in their friend group or in their society, in their generation. Yeah. So I've included some of the experiences that we have heard from this generation here to show you that, number one, they are largely cognizant of digital well-being as a topic, and they want to work with caregivers and schools and teachers and nonprofits. They want to work with us to increase digital well-being across the board. Number two, they do have a range of ways that they experience risks to their digital well-being. Some of these risks, as you can see, are cyber safety related. So we have somebody up here saying cyber stalking is an issue that has come up in their life before, or their friend groups. Another person says social media. So social media is something that's a little more nuanced. It's not directly related to only cyber safety, right? It might have some cyber safety components, but to understand the impact of social media as a digital well-being topic, you have to go beyond cyber safety understanding, yeah? And then we see other people saying that something like algorithms are having a disproportionate impact on their mental health and on their lives and the lives of their friends, right? So again, there are a real wide, diverse range of ways that digital natives themselves are very cognizant that they want to take control of their digital well-being. And if you start looking for these cyber risks in the lives of your family, of your school, your friend group, or the students who you work with, or the kids that you take care of, I would encourage you to go and observe what are they, so that you can understand that it's not about fixing a digital native or taking technology away from them. It's about working with them to hear their voice about what they're seeing in the world, and then also trying to support them to make safer and healthier decisions for their well-being as they grow as a digital native, because the technology is going to stay around and it's going to get most likely more strong, and the algorithms are going to become more diverse and more complex and harder to manage. So this workshop really will not be about taking the screens away. I think if it's not already clear, it's about working with the child in the context of history that we are living in. So in order to explore this most fully with your child after you leave this workshop, I would encourage you to turn to your handbook, page 5, and take a moment to reflect and journal. What social, emotional, and life skills did you develop when you were off a screen, when you were playing as a child? Yeah. And the reason I want you to think about this, so go ahead and do that. And while you're doing that, or after you're doing it, I want you to think about what are the skills that you developed in the context of play, and how can you help your child in a digital era where they're surrounded by the possibility of screens? How can you help them bring some of those positive qualities of play into a technology-based era? Yeah. Again, there are moments where it is not necessary to have technology to play, right? All of us know that. And kids nowadays, even with technology, they play all the time off of technology. And that's great. So it's important to strike that balance. But to talk about eliminating technology completely is not very realistic, right? For most of us. So what I am going to ask you to do after you do your own journaling is look back at what were the moments in play in your own childhood where you felt really engaged, where you felt that you were exploring something new, where you felt like you were developing social skills and empathy, where you felt that you were developing social skills through conflict management and negotiation and navigating friction, right? Where you felt like you were having fun, but also there was just something happening where you were growing as a person. These are the benefits of play that have been well documented in child development and psychology. All of these can be transferred carefully and thoughtfully if you are intentional into a digital native world, right? Part of it does have to do with making sure that these qualities are not affected by overuse of technology. But what we're going to try and work towards today is figuring out, how do you manage the balance between on and offline activity? How do you read the context within your family's life to find out what that balance looks like for you? Because every child is different and every caregiving experience is different. And then how do you make sure that regardless of what your balance looks like, which only you can really know, how do you know that you definitely are preserving and focusing on the benefits of play and connection and intentionality in the way that you use your technology with your child? So, very briefly, let's talk about how a phone based childhood happened. So, I'll give you a moment to take a guess. And actually, the answer is all of them. Yeah. So I want to talk for a second about this concept of technological creep. This refers to a very subtle and gradual expansion of a technology's original purpose. So you can think about it like a slippery slope, where, for example, there might be an ed tech app that's designed to teach English language, but it ends up becoming a biometric collection tool. Yeah. Or there might be an app that was initially introduced to help manage contact between people who had contracted COVID, but it ends up being used for something totally different, which is criminal investigations or using the data for something that is not health related. So the point here is that a phone-based childhood really was something that was characterized by technological creep. We didn't, as a society, vote one day, right? In 2005, when iPhones became popular, we didn't stand up and do a referendum globally where we said, all right, we think it's okay for kids to now look at screens all the time. Or, all right, when everyone's on the bus, you are allowed not to make eye contact with anyone. We didn't make these decisions. But when it comes to technology that's driven by private sector tech corporations, they don't need us to make these decisions. The free market sort of makes the decision for them, right? So they designed the technology to be as attention grabbing as possible. They were allowed to. Regulators didn't really keep up because the impact of attention-based devices and addictive devices is very hard to track from a mental and emotional and a behavioral perspective. And eventually, after about one or two generations, what we have now is it's become normalized for us to deprioritize connection in person. It's become normalized for us to not try and communicate with each other, even when there's no reason for us to be on our phones or on our screens. And these are all examples of technological creep, yeah? And it's important to be cognizant of that. It wasn't anyone's fault, but it's everyone's problem, right? So if you'd like, I would also invite you to think about your own world in Hong Kong. Do you believe that the kids who you see have more phone-based or play-based childhoods? And I would encourage you to take this question into the next coffee that you have with your friends, the next family dinner you have, and just sort of hear people's opinions. This is something that has been normalized for so long globally, not just in Hong Kong, that it's important to start the conversation somewhere. All right, so now I want to jump into the cyber safety part of it. And I want to talk about cyber safety again because this is the most urgent and time sensitive part of digital well being. That's because we do see globally that children as victims of cyber threats is increasing. And it's not just through clicking on links or sending money. It's cyber risks that span reputational risks. So people publishing information or accusing your children online of things that damage their actual reputation and could affect their employment opportunities as well as their academic opportunities. But it's also obviously violent and sexualized contact from strangers or from video exposure to media and videos. And of course, it's actual contact with people who are trying to scam your child or get in touch with them to do something like send them money. It's actually gotten so bad that one of the major players who does research in this field, based in Singapore, called the DQ Institute, has been tracking this through an annual report about children's cyber risks for the past 4 years. And they have coined the term persistent cyber pandemic, specifically about what kids are experiencing, because they have really seen that the numbers are quite alarming since COVID. And since COVID, for example, they've seen something like a 20% increase in cybercrime victims who are children. And there's more than twice the amount per transaction of financial losses once a child has been financially scammed. So one of the things that's really important to understand as a caregiver is that cyber safety and airbags and seatbelts looks pretty different for our children than it was when we were kids in the 80s or the 90s or the 70s. Yeah. Back in even as late as pre-Instagram era, say 2008, pre-AI era, we saw a lot of phishing emails. We knew not to click on weird links. We knew not to accept friend requests from people who we didn't know. And many of the scams, even though there was some sort of automation to them, a lot of them were humans typing behind a computer, right? And it would take people some level of competency to even run a scam in terms of their language level, the way they used grammar, the way they positioned themselves and gained your trust. There's sort of like, it was still very human led, yeah? But now in 2025, not only do we have AI, we have a lot of social media, and we have all of that proliferation of emerging technology that is incredibly powerful, incredibly non-human, and able to sort of replicate our own communication style back at us. Yeah. So what this means is that cyber safety is now highly personalized. It can be very targeted. So it isn't just sending out an email, the same email template to 3,000 people and then hoping that 1% clicks on it, right? Like it used to be. It can actually be as specific as we know everything about this 8-year-old because their parent has been posting so much online about them, or because they're an IG celebrity, or because their friends post a lot about them online and we see their photos and we know what they do and what they like. We know all of those data points around this specific child through publicly available platforms that are not very protected. And we're going to use all of that data to create a profile on them, a psychological and a behavioral and a geographic profile that then we will feed into a machine or have a human being really read through before they even try and make contact with that child in order to gain their trust. Yeah. Also, this is the same approach that they do for adults, and not just for children, right? And another thing that we see is that a lot of this is driven by humans that are increasingly leveraging bots and AI. So it's all of the strengths and the creativity of human cybercrime empowered by the engine of an incredibly powerful deepfake automated machine, usually through AI tools. And a lot of these are coming from organized cybercrime units that have increased the number of the cyber threats that are going out, which means number of cyber threats go up. Generally speaking, the number and quality of cyber threats increases. That will increase the number of chances that one of the hooks gets into you or somebody who you love, right? So it's pretty different nowadays when you talk about cyber safety. Let's talk about how to address this and who is in a position to address it. So who do you think is responsible for cyber safety? The answer is everyone. But because we're here today in a caregiving workshop, we really want to focus on the fact that parents and guardians are the people who give the first digital footprint to your children. And going back from this, working backwards, if you are the first person to give your child a digital trail and start essentially posting videos or posting information about them online, what do you think the best way to protect them from cyber threats is? The answer, in Kagumi Group's opinion, is you prioritize building preventative habits and decreasing risky data sharing. So preventative behavior is something that we consider to be things like brushing your teeth, focusing on your long-term digital well-being by cleaning up your data trail. And it's not things like wait until a data breach happens and then talk to your kid's teacher about why they didn't teach them that. And it's not things like wait until your kid uses your credit card to buy something from a gaming site and then only after that send them to a class about cyber safety. These are preventative, hygienic habits that we need to be teaching our kids about how to navigate the digital world that are sort of similar to like how you would teach your kid to brush your teeth. So we don't even think about the fact that we teach our kids brush your teeth, comb your hair, wash your face, because that's what we consider hygiene. Yeah. It's become normalized in our society because it's good. It's good for you to brush your teeth every day. It stops your teeth from falling out. Yeah. So preventative care, that's preventative care. And for cyber safety, that's what you want to be doing too. So let's talk a little bit about how to build preventative care. First, I want to ask you, what do you think makes you you? Like, what is the special sauce that you think makes you you living on this earth right now? What would you say? And so I think most of us would say maybe A, maybe B, maybe C, right? I don't think many of us would say D, right? I don't think that many of us would say, well, if you knew my foot size and you knew Mila's head circumference and you knew Mila's blood type, you definitely would know me. You definitely, that would be a complete good characterization of me. I don't think a lot of us would say that. But unfortunately, a lot of the digital world does think that way. Companies, marketers, as well as cyber criminals or malicious actors do see us as bags of data. And we have to think from that perspective if we want to avoid them, right? We have to think from that perspective when we are on the internet or using devices in general. They see us as biological data and biometric data. They also see us as legal and financial data. And they see us as socio-behavioral data, right? All of us have these different metrics all jumbled up. And there are many, many industries that are built up around this to legally mine all of this data from us. It's just that most of us don't think about it. So all of us have a data trail, or what you call a digital footprint, regardless of whether you like it or not. And this digital footprint starts from day one. Actually, it starts from even before day one when you're thinking about your kids. So for example, when I had my first child, when did I give them a data trail, do you think? I actually gave them a data trail when I took a photo of the prenatal photo that I was so excited about at 20 weeks, right? And then I WhatsApped it to my family. And that wasn't the wrong thing to do, but that was the first time. By sending that data into the world in a careful way, and I asked my parents not to forward it to anyone else, I still gave them a digital footprint, right? And so it starts very, very early on for our kids. And it's important for us as parents who are giving them their first digital footprint from even before they're able to make their own decisions. It's important for us to think about being stewards of their data. So we think, number one, is the person or the organization that I'm sharing this photo or this information to or on, how much do I trust that organization or that person? And number two, is it really necessary to share that photo in this specific forum with this specific group of people? Or is it something that maybe I could show the people in person on my phone? Maybe next time I have a dinner with that friend or with that group of people, I could show them quickly on my phone and not share it over a virtual pathway. The next principle is you want to make sure that you clean up your digital trail as much as possible. And this means going back on a regular basis to look through your social media accounts, as well as really any of the platforms you have, and making sure that you delete things that may not best represent you or your children. So the thing to remember at any point in time, regardless of how old your kid is or how aware your family is of their digital footprint, is that the more data you share online or on an app, the higher the risk is of some of that data being used for something that you don't want it to be used for. And that's simply the principle of the way the internet works. So now we're going to go very quickly into major vocabulary around major cyber crimes. Number one, phishing. So phishing is posing as somebody who you're not, pretending to be a credible person, and then using your credibility to try and extract sensitive information. And vishing is another form of that. So vishing refers to using your voice to phish. And nowadays, with AI deepfake technology, commercially possible for anyone, including myself or you, to Google how to recreate somebody's voice and to pay a very small or even not pay anything at all to use as little as 30 seconds of somebody's voice to create a very long paragraph of something that they could say. And we can program them to say anything, right? So there have been major instances globally, most notably in Asia and Singapore, of a lot of phishing attacks. And governments are starting to get very concerned about it, and we should as well, because the technology is there to make this possible and very affordable. Another common terminology is doxing, which is publishing sensitive information on the internet. If you have a child who is in the early adolescent stage, I would definitely encourage you to explore what doxing means and how it might be appearing in your child's friend group or in their school, because doxing is something that we see becoming more and more normalized amongst younger kids who actually don't necessarily mean it to be cybercrime. They maybe think that it's a form of teasing, or it could even be playing around with your friend in a way that gets out of hand. So doxing is something that is very important to understand as a caregiver. And finally, grooming. So grooming is manipulating or exploiting people by purposely manipulating their trust in you. So you go into a relationship online with somebody and they really put a lot of effort into gaining your trust and seeming like a real person, and then they use that to try and get something out of you. So why do people do these things? Well, number one, through phishing and doxing, it's usually financial gain. Also, doxing can be a really good way that people think of taking revenge. So again, doxing is something that's very important to understand because it's extremely hard to protect yourself legally from doxing if it results in reputational risk, but no physical risk. And if you're a parent who has a child on social media, I'd say also you want to think about how doxing and even grooming might factor into cyberbullying, because these are not totally separate things. We could definitely have cyberbullying situations that have a little bit of doxing, a little bit of grooming, and are just really used to make life difficult on the internet for a child who's being bullied. All right, so let's talk about what the common denominator in these stories is. So first of all, almost all the people were making decisions in isolation. So they weren't checking with friends or family on what they should do in the situation, and that led to poor decision making. And then second, they all felt rushed and they made a decision in haste, right? So a lot of people who experienced the past four examples of grooming or phishing or doxing, they tend to make these decisions in haste. And this is because scammers know that if they make you make a rush decision and if they make you isolated to make the decision, that there's a highly likelihood of success, right, for them. So scammers rely on this illusion of urgency to get you to make the poor decisions, and they want to keep you socially isolated so that they can complete their scam and they can get the money out of you, or they can keep on extorting you or even bullying you. So it's extremely important not to let them do those two things. Always know that you're not alone, and always remember that even though it might be embarrassing what's happening to you, you should be honest with the problem that you're experiencing with people you trust. So go to them, ask them to check your thinking, and know that you don't need to rush any transaction or any decision making with whoever is on the other side of that screen if it feels a little funny in your stomach. And this is one of the many things that we, going back to what I was saying before, want to teach our kids about good digital hygiene. Something like listening to your gut or your instincts, not rushing to make decisions online, making sure you clean up your digital trail, thinking before you post. These are emotional and socio-behavioral expectations that we need to start to be normalizing with our kids in our households. All right, so now I want to jump quickly into a definition of digital well-being itself. And to start out with, we have the benefit of some guest speakers who have shared their experience with us as experts, academic experts and researchers in the space of well-being science and positive psychology. So one of them is Dr. Dr. Datu, who is based in Hong Kong at Hong Kong University, and his wife, Dr. Jana Valdez, who also is a professor in her own right at the Education University of Hong Kong. So they shared a little bit about their research so we can understand the basis for well-being science in general. And what we see is that well-being really is not about just scratching your itch or making sure that you pursue the greatest happiness as fast as possible. Yeah. Well-being is pretty complex. And luckily, there is a lot of research behind what well-being is composed of. And it's composed of things like experiencing long-term emotions related to engagement. It's about experiencing relationships where you connect in a meaningful way and feel connected and supporting of others. It also is finding a sense of purpose and meaning, feeling that you're part of something bigger in life, right? Whether it's through religion or through a social cause or working with an NGO, whatever it is. And things like, obviously, feeling that you've gotten somewhere, feeling in a sense of achievement and of mastery and accomplishment. And when we look at how the research shows us how to achieve it, we see that number one, prioritizing meaningful relationships and doing things together, and things like having meaning in your life, pursuing activities that bring you joy and feel and make you feel that you are working towards a sense of mastery about something, and also failing and getting back up. These are all important key elements of what we see well-being manifests as across many domains of life. Yeah. So this is not just work oriented. It's not just academically oriented. And these are all things that we now are going to jump off of into our section about how to bring well-being into a home environment. So first, I want to talk a little bit about what we know about how parents currently engage and make meaningful communication relationships about technology with their children. And one of those ways is called restrictive mediation. So a lot of the ways that parents currently talk to kids about technology is that they have rules. They have rules like you can only watch YouTube for 3 hours total on the weekends, or you can only watch Peppa Pig or play your game while I am making dinner and looking after your 1-year-old brother, right? These are very common rules. But other than that, the parents don't really have a way to talk about technology or use technology together. That's what we call restrictive mediation, is just you rely on rules and there's not a lot else in the world for you guys other than rules around technology. Another form of mediation is called passive mediation or co-use. And that means that when your child uses technology, whether it's gaming or watching a video or watching TV or using social media on their own, when that happens, I'm usually with them. But I sort of am like hanging out. So you can think about this as a parent who's sitting down on the couch or sitting down at a restaurant near your child, and you're sort of like keeping one eye on what they're doing to make sure they're like not doing something they shouldn't, but you're not actively talking to them about what's going on and you're not asking them any questions about it. That's pretty common too, right? And the next form is active mediation. So that means that when your child is using technology, you regularly are there and you regularly make sure that you ask them friendly questions about it, that you ask them about how they are communicating with their friends and what are they talking about. You have an interest in what is going on in their world when they are on a device. And then the next version of that is called deference mediation, which is I feel that my kids are probably old enough to or mature enough to make most of their decisions about technology. So I don't need to rely only on rules. I don't tell them, get off your phone, or I don't cut off the Wi-Fi, because I feel that we're at a stage where my child has some level of judgment and they'll come to me if they need help. So when we look at this, we can think about the well-being principles that we saw in the previous section, right? Well-being is about meaningful engagement. It's about connection. It's about intentionality. And it's also about some level of competency and decision making. These are all concepts that do show up very strongly in the digital parenting things that you were talking about right now, but it also are concepts that show up in your child's lived experience individually about how they need to grow up about making their own decisions in technology. Yeah. So let's focus on just one of these things that we can work on immediately after this workshop, which is how do we increase active mediation style in our interactions? Maybe we don't do active mediation every single time, but how do we increase the proportion of active mediation and connections in our lives with our family and our children, and decrease or maybe lower the proportion of something like restrictive mediation? And I'll give some common examples. So if you have kids who are maybe younger and they like to, for example, watch videos on YouTube, a very simple thing you can do to do more active mediation is ask questions like, what's going on? It actually is so simple that it sounds like, I think our brains already have walked past that option because it's so easy, right? But what you're encouraging them to do and what you're inviting them to do with that phrase, what's happening, is you actually are starting to ask them critically think about what you're seeing on the screen. What is it that is happening in this video? Is this a joke video? Is it a real video? Is it a video that was intentionally staged? Is it a video that is just for fun? Like, what is actually going on? These are actually very simple questions that we can quickly use to scaffold their understanding of the media that they are consuming right now. Another thing you can ask is, wow, that pig just fell off that waterfall. How did they do that? Right? Or like, that bird just did a backflip off of a chicken, like, why did that happen? There are a lot of fun things that you can start to talk to your kids about related to becoming more responsible consumers of media. So again, you're not telling them, oh, that's definitely a fake video. There's no way a bird can do that, right? It's more like, whoa, that was interesting. Did you notice anything interesting about that video? Or it might be something, if they're more hands-on or they're maybe older, instead of consuming passive media about this and watching a bird backflip, should we figure out whether a bird can actually backflip? Should we do some research online and become active consumers of this media and figure out if there are ways that a bird can actually do that with the way that its legs are formed? You can start to use it as a form of inquiry, right? So again, moving from passive consumption of the media into active consumption. A lot of the media that's out there may want kids to remain passive. That's really something that we're going to want to keep an eye on, because so much of the media is going to be positioned as getting kids to buy things, to like things, to prefer certain things so that they can make purchasing decisions later, or they can pressure you to make purchasing decisions. So you're really going to want to fight against that and make every moment, as much as you can with your child watching some passive media, make it into an active engagement in some way. Yeah. Another thing you can do in terms of expanding their world when they're watching passive media is ask questions like, what do you think that fictional character is feeling right now, right? This is the same way that you would encourage them to build their social emotional skills and their empathy skills using any other form of media, like a book, right? Or playing with toys, like, oh, ooh, you just ran over me with your G.I. Joe. How do you think my stuffed animal feels about that, right? And again, it's not putting words in their mouth about how the character feels, but it's just drawing their attention gently and inviting them to expand the activity that's going on with the screen or with the activity. If your kid is a gamer, really easy ways to include them is, how do I do this game? Yeah. You might also be a gamer. And if you do know how to do that move, then fake it. be like, I don't know how to get past that level, or I keep on dying. Can you teach me how to do this? And you have your kid, again, develop their critical thinking skills and their social emotional skills and their communication skills by teaching you something that you may not know. Yeah. So the goal here, again, is to move from passive consumption of media to more active mediation or active engagement. Through this technique, it's a really easy way. If you can build a good, consistent behavior, it's a good way to increase the sense of connection between you and your child without yelling about them being on a screen, without having to only rely on rules. It's also a good way to develop their sense of meaningful engagement in their own brain when they are looking at something that originally was positioned as passive to get them hooked. Yeah. So you're building your competencies as a family of digital well-being on two levels. You're building your own competencies as a parent, and you're also building your child's competency. All right, so the final section, let's go into how to role model and find support for digital well-being. And the first thing I want to note is that when you Google any topic related to digital well-being, you'll get a range of sources, which is natural, like any Google source. And some of these are going to be more credible than others. So I would encourage you to find the most impartial sources that you can. For example, most of the time, the medical providers and researchers will be the ones who don't have an agenda, and they probably are not receiving as much money as some of the other sources when it comes to digital well-being from big tech players or from people who might have agendas. So definitely ones that we suggest going to for credible data are organizations like the Digital Wellness Lab out of Boston Children's Hospital and the WHO, ones that you may also want to check out because they do have parenting sources, but that we would take with a grain of salt because of their ties into corporate funding from tech companies, are ones like Common Sense Media or the internetmatters.org. Even if they're registered as nonprofits, we do find that you have to look very carefully into where their funding is coming from in order to understand whether they are able to give impartial information related to children's digital well-being. Yeah. Most number one credible source you will want to turn to about digital well-being will be your school, your children's school, or your own friend group. And that's because you need to start building a community, right? We need to be learning from each other about the lived challenges of raising kids in a digital age. And then when we hit a wall, going to these credible sources to try and figure it out together. So close, trusted friends and family are definitely going to be your primary sources, the people who you go to first. Also, the school's parenting association, if you are a parent, and the social emotional counselor at your school. Finally, of course, there are professional medical providers, including mental health specialists and therapists and pediatricians who might be able in your community to support you. So these are the primary entities that you should be going to after you've maybe done a quick Google search, yeah? And the secondary sources might be things like online blogs, reaching out to other parents who maybe write about this stuff, right? Credible tools that may be positioned for people in your circumstances. So one example that we're currently testing still is Alice, our digital parenting coach, that definitely need to be used in context of continuing to first go to your in-person friends, definitely used in the context of being combined with what your counselor says or combined with what your pediatrician and therapist say. Yeah. So in all of these circumstances, regardless of who you find you trust the most and what range of sources you end up incorporating into your planning for your own family, you want to always think critically and contextualize about whether this advice is actually suitable for your children and your family. And the last thing that we'll say before we close is that every child is different. So we work regularly with families who have multiple children, and it's very common for the parents to say, what worked with my 15-year-old when she got a phone did not work at all for the 8-year-old now that she's talking about her phone. And then I say, what about the 13-year-old? And the 13-year-old was totally different too, right? So it's really important to realize that just like every child is different and almost every other personality trait, their relationship and appetite for technology and what they like to do on technology and the way that their friend group uses technology is going to be completely different. So when you think about a piece of advice, think about it in the context of your child and your family's definition of what does well-being look like. How is connection meaningful in my child's life for the 8-year-old, for the 13-year-old, for the 15-year-old? What do I think they need, and what do I need to do with them to help them and support them to reach that sense of well-being? So that is all that we have for today. And I want to thank Adversity again for giving us the opportunity to run this workshop. If you'd like to stay in touch with Kagumi Group, please do see the contact information on this slide. And going forward, I wish you all the best with your family when it comes to digital well-being.